China didn't fear Europe. It dismissed Europe entirely. For centuries, the most powerful empire on earth had viewed European traders as little more than a nuisance, like irritating mosquitoes at the fringes of their world. It was a choice, a miscalculation, that would ultimately cost them everything. Let's rewind. No, further back. The year is 1793. A British diplomat has sailed thousands of miles to stand before the Chinese emperor. He comes bearing the finest gifts the West can offer: intricate telescopes, detailed planetary models, and ornate clocks capable of telling time in multiple cities at once. The very pinnacle of European science and craftsmanship. He is ready to negotiate, to open up a new era of trade. But the Chinese emperor has no desire to negotiate. He doesn't even view the diplomat as an equal. In the emperor's eyes, this British lord was just another barbarian chieftain from a distant land, coming to pay tribute to the greatest civilization on earth. What happened next would irrevocably change the world. To truly grasp why China so thoroughly rejected Europe, we must journey even further into the past. We need to understand the lens through which China saw itself and the rest of humanity. For over 2 millennia, China operated under a framework known as the Tributary System. There is a full video on this topic on the channel, so I will offer just a brief overview here. The Tributary System wasn't merely a political arrangement. It was a comprehensive worldview, a cosmic order that dictated how the universe itself was structured. At the absolute center of everything was the Chinese emperor, the Son of Heaven. The Chinese believed their land, the Middle Kingdom, was the literal moral and cultural center of the world. Everyone else existed on the periphery. The farther one was from China, the more uncivilized they were considered to be. And this wasn't just empty pride. For most of recorded history, China was in fact the most advanced civilization on the planet. They had invented paper, printing, gunpowder, and the compass hundreds of years before Europe. Their cities were massive and meticulously planned. Their culture was deeply sophisticated. Their economy was immense. As late as 1820, China alone accounted for nearly a third of the entire world's economic output. The tributary system was a direct reflection of this reality. If you wished to trade with China, you had to play by their rules. Foreign rulers were required to send envoys bearing lavish gifts, tribute, for the emperor. These envoys would then perform the kowtow, a profound ritual of submission where one kneels 3 times and bows so low that their forehead touches the ground 9 times. It was an act of complete and total submission, literally prostrating oneself before the Son of Heaven. In return, the emperor would bestow gifts upon the envoy, often of greater value than what they had brought, and grant them permission to trade. But make no mistake, this was not a transaction between equals. It was an acknowledgement that China was superior and that you were a lesser state seeking the emperor's benevolence. Nations like Korea and Vietnam participated in this system for centuries. It brought a certain stability to East Asia and facilitated trade. Most importantly, it relentlessly reinforced the core idea that China was the center of civilization and all other nations revolved around it like planets around the sun. This worldview was so deeply ingrained in Chinese culture that when Europeans began arriving in the 1500s and 1600s, the Chinese elite simply could not conceive of any other way of conducting international relations. The notion that some distant island nation could be an equal power was preposterous. The idea that these foreigners might possess technology or knowledge that China needed was laughable. The first major European diplomatic mission to China took place in 1793. King George III of Britain dispatched Lord Macartney to meet with the Qianlong Emperor. Britain had a significant problem. They were purchasing massive quantities of tea, silk, and porcelain from China, but China had no interest in anything Britain was selling. The trade imbalance was staggering, and Britain was hemorrhaging silver to pay for its imports. Macartney's mission had clear objectives: open more Chinese ports to British trade, establish a permanent British embassy in Beijing, and reduce the heavy trade restrictions. In short, he was to persuade China to treat Britain as an equal trading partner, not as just another minor tributary state. Macartney brought with him 600 cases of gifts, including state-of-the-art scientific instruments, advanced weaponry, and fine artwork. The sheer scale of the mission was designed to impress, requiring 90 wagons, 40 carts, 200 horses, and 3,000 porters just to transport the cargo. He arrived on a 64-gun warship with a crew of nearly 100 men. This was no small gesture. Britain was putting its best foot forward. From the moment Macartney arrived, however, things began to go wrong. Chinese officials insisted on labeling his offerings as tribute. Macartney steadfastly maintained they were gifts between equal sovereigns. Then came the most significant point of contention, the kowtow. Chinese officials demanded that Macartney perform the full 9 prostration ceremony before the emperor. Macartney refused. He offered to kneel on one knee, just as he would before his own king, but he would not perform the full kowtow. To the Chinese, this was a grave insult. To Macartney, performing the kowtow would be a humiliating admission of Britain's inferiority. A compromise was eventually reached, and Macartney did kneel before the emperor, though the exact nature of his gesture remains a subject of historical debate. But the real issue wasn't the ceremony, it was what followed. Emperor Qianlong and his court officials examined the British gifts, the planetariums, the advanced weaponry, the intricate machinery, and were utterly unimpressed. In their view, these were merely curious toys. They believed their own craftsmen could replicate them if needed, or more to the point, they simply had no use for them. One Chinese official remarked dismissively, "The English are fond of showing off." When it came time to respond to King George's requests, Emperor Qianlong penned a letter that was, in essence, a polite but firm thanks, but no thanks. He informed King George that China possessed all things in abundance and had no need for foreign products. As for opening more ports or establishing an embassy, absolutely not. One port was sufficient, and foreign ambassadors residing permanently in Beijing was unthinkable. Their language and customs were too alien for them to ever fit in. The emperor's response made one thing crystal clear. China saw Britain as just another peripheral kingdom seeking favors. The concept of equal diplomatic relations wasn't even on the table. While China was dismissing British technology as trinkets, Europe was in the throes of the Industrial Revolution. In 1793, the very year of Macartney's mission, British factories were beginning to reshape the world. Steam engines were powering massive textile mills. Iron production was skyrocketing. New technologies were making British ships faster, their cannons more powerful, their entire military more lethal. Britain was building an industrial war machine that would soon dominate the planet. China, wrapped in its long-held sense of superiority, missed all of this. They looked at Macartney's gifts and saw fancy gadgets, not the dawn of a technological revolution that would elevate Europe to global dominance within a few short decades. Why did China miss it? Because their entire worldview confirmed they were already at the zenith of civilization. Having been the world's most advanced culture for millennia, they couldn't imagine being surpassed. They measured a society's greatness by its philosophy, art, and social harmony, areas where they truly did excel. They weren't focused on industrial output or military technology in the same way Europe was beginning to. There is also the practical reality that China didn't need an industrial revolution in the same way Europe did. China had a vast population and an abundance of cheap labor. European nations, by contrast, faced labor shortages and higher wages, which created a powerful incentive to invent labor-saving machinery. China simply didn't feel that pressure. Their traditional methods were sufficient for their needs. But this created a colossal blind spot. While China remained comfortable in its traditional ways, Europe was surging ahead. And China didn't just overlook the Industrial Revolution. In many ways, it actively rejected it. They viewed European methods as barbaric, uncivilized, and fundamentally beneath them. Some historians argue this was not mere arrogance, but a rational response based on centuries of experience. The tributary system had worked flawlessly to maintain peace and protect Chinese interests. Why fix what wasn't broken? Other historians contend it was a classic case of pride before the fall. China was so thoroughly convinced of its own supremacy that it became blind to the rising threat right before its eyes. China's rejection of Europe didn't make the problem disappear. It made it worse. Much worse. By the 1830s, Britain had finally found a commodity that China would buy in vast quantities: opium. British and American merchants began to flood the country with the narcotic, grown in British India and shipped to Chinese ports. I won't delve deeper into the opium trade here, as we have a full video on the channel dedicated to it, titled, "How Britain Nearly Destroyed China with Opium." I highly recommend you check it out after this. Because the opium trade did more than just open up China. It kicked off what would become known as China's century of humiliation. The century of humiliation didn't just alter China's borders. It fundamentally and forever changed how China sees the world. Click the video on your screen to learn what happened next. Thanks for watching, and see you there.